I need a new sign. Hey guys, this is Allison from Alley Cat Creations. How are you? I want to welcome all the new subscribers. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. It helps me get out there a little bit more to get people out of the one book paradigm. If you get anything from my work, an epiphany, a mic drop, an amazing light bulb moment, you get a new author to read, a new book to explore, please consider supporting my work. All the links will be linked down below. I'm still here. Had an appraisal this morning. Hopefully that's good news soon that I'm out of here. Praying. Because without getting out of here, I can't eat or take care of myself. And the limbo will be just prolonged. Not looking forward to that. Today I'm going to read The Secret Doctrine by Blavatsky and continuation on additional facts and explorations concerning the globes and the monads. So sit back, relax. Before I begin, there are some words in here that I cannot pronounce, and I'm not here to disrespect anybody's languages. Please bear with me. Two statements made in esoteric Buddhism must be noticed and the author's opinions quoted. It is said, quote, the spiritual monads do not fully complete their mineral existence on globe A, then complete it on globe B, and so on. They pass several times around the whole circle as minerals, and then again several times around as vegetables, and several times as animals. We purposely refrain from the present from going into figures, end quote. This was a wise course to adopt in view of a great secrecy maintained with regards to figures and numbers. This reticence is now partially relinquished, but it would perhaps be better had the real numbers concerning rounds and evolutionary gyrations been either entirely divulged at the time or as entirely withheld. Mr. Sinnett understood the difficulty when saying, quote, for reasons which are not easy for the outsider to divine, the possessors of occult knowledge are especially reluctant to give out facts relating to cosmogony, though it is hard for the uninitiated to understand why they should be withheld, end quote. That there were such reasons is evident. Nevertheless, it is the reticence that most of the confused ideas of some Eastern as well as Western pupils are due. The difficulties in the way of the acceptance of the two particular tenets under consideration seem great, just because of the absence of any data to go upon. But there it was. For the figures belonging to the occult calculations cannot be given, as the masters have many times declared, outside the circle of pledge, chelas, and not even these can break the rules. To make things plainer, without touching upon the mathematical aspects of the doctrine, the teaching giving many expanded and some obscure points solved. As the evolution of the globes and that of monads are so closely interblended, we will make of the two teachings one. In the reference to the monads, the reader is asked to bear in mind the Eastern philosophy rejects the Western theology dogma of newly created soul for every baby born, as being as unphilosophical as it is impossible in the economy of nature. There must be a limited number of monads evolving and growing more and more perfect through their assimilation of many successive personalities in every new Manvarata. This is absolutely necessary in view of the doctrine of rebirth, karma, and the gradual return of the human monad to its source, absolute deity. I agree with this. Thus, although the hosts of more or less progressed monads are almost incalculable, they are still finite, as in everything in the universe of differentiation and finiteness. As shown in the double diagram of the human principles and the ascending globes of the world chains, and I have that in another episode, there is an eternal consecration of cause and effects and a perfect analogy which runs through and links together. Although the lines of evolution, one begets the other globes and personalities, but let us begin at the beginning. The general outline of the process by which the successive planetary chains are formed has just been given. To prevent future misconceptions, some further details may be offered, which are and will also throw light on the history of humanity on our own chain, the progeny of that of the moon. In the diagrams, which is on the next page I'll show, represents the lunar chain of 7 planets at the outset of its 7th or last round, while figure 2 represents the Earth chain, which will be, but is not yet in existence. The 7 globes of each chain are distinguished in their cyclical order by the letters A to G, the globes of the Earth chain being further marked by a cross, the symbol of the Earth, it's a plus sign. Now, it must be remembered that the monads cycling around any serpentary chain are divided into 7 classes or hierarchies according to their respective stages of evolution, consciousness, and merit. Let us follow, then, the order of their appearance on planet A in the first round. The time spaces between the appearances of the hierarchies on any globe are so adjusted that when class 7, the last appears on globe A, class 1, the first, has just passed on to globe B, and step by step all around the chain. Again, the 7th round on the lunar chain, when class 7, the last, quits globe A, the globe, instead of falling asleep as it had done in previous rounds, begins to die, to go into planetary prilaya. And in dying, it transfers successfully, as just said, its principles or life elements and energy, one after the other, to new Laya center, which commences the formation of globe A or the Earth chain. A similar process takes place for each of the globes of the lunar chain, one after the other, each forming a fresh globe of the Earth chain. Our moon was the 4th globe of the series. It was on the same plane of perception as our Earth. But globe A, the lunar chain, is not fully dead till the first monads of the first class has passed from globe G to Z, the last of the lunar chain, into nirvana. And I'm going to share screen so you could see this right here, the diagram. And if you need more time, you can pause. This is the Earth. This is the moon. Hope that helped. Lunar chain entered the nirvana, which awaits them between the 2 chains, and similarly for all the other globes are stated, each giving birth to the corresponding globe of the Earth chain. Further, when globe A of the new chain is ready, the first class of hierarchy of monads from the lunar chain incarnate upon it in the lowest kingdom, and so on successively. The result of this is that it is only the first class of monads which obtains the human state of development during the first round, since the second class on each planet arriving later has not time to reach that stage. Thus, the monads of class 2 reach the incipient human stage only in the second round, and so on up to the middle of the 4th round. But at this point, and on this fourth round, in which the human stage will be fully developed, the door into the human kingdom closes, and henceforth the number of human monads in the human stage of development is complete. For the monads which had not reached the human stage by this point will, owing to the evolution of humanity itself, find themselves so far behind that they will reach the human stage only at the close of the seventh and last round. They will therefore not be men on this chain, but will form the humanity of a future Manvarata and be rewarded by becoming men on the higher chain altogether, thus receiving their karmic compensation. To this there is but one solitary exception, for very good reasons, of which we shall speak further, but this account for the difference in the races. It thus becomes apparent how perfect in the analogy between the processive and natural state in the cosmos in the individual man. The latter lives through his life cycle and dies, his higher principles corresponding to the development of a planetary chain to the cycling monads, passing into the Vachin, which corresponds to the nirvana, and states of rest intervening between two chains. The man's lower principles are disintegrated in time and are used by nature again for the formation of new human principles. And the same process takes place in the disintegration and formation of worlds. Analogy is thus the surest guide to the comprehension of the occult teachings. This is one of the 7 mysteries of the moon, and it is now revealed. The 7 mysteries are called by the Japanese Yamabusis, the mystics of the Lao Taozi sect, and the ascetic monks of Kato, the Densdo, the 7 jewels. Only the Japanese and the Chinese Buddhists, ascetics, and initiates are, if possible, even more reticent in giving out their knowledge than are the Hindus. And again, I'm here not to butcher Japanese or other languages. Please be kind. The monad hosts may be roughly divided into 3 great classes. 1, the most developed monads, the lunar gods or spirits called in India the Pitris, whose function is to pass in the first round through the whole triple cycle of the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms in their most ethereal, filmy, and rudimentary forms in order to clothe themselves in and assimilate the nature of the newly formed chain. There are those who first reach the human form, if there can be any form in the realm of the most subjective. On globe A is the first round. It is they, therefore, who lead and represent the human element during the 2nd and 3rd rounds, and finally evolve their shadows at the beginning of the 4th round for the 2nd class, or those who come behind them. Those monads that are the first to reach the human stage during the 3.5 rounds and to become men. The laggards, the monads, which are retarded and which will not reach by reason of karmic impediments the human stage at all during this cycle or round, save one exception which will be spoken of elsewhere, as already promised. Now the evolution of the eternal form or body round the astral is produced by the terrestrial forces, just as in the case of the lower kingdoms. But the evolution of the eternal or real man is purely spiritual. It is now no more a passage of impersonal monad through many and various forms of matter, endowed at best with instinct and consciousness on quite a different plane, as in the case of external evolution, but a journey of the pilgrim soul through the various states of not only matter but self-consciousness and self-perception, or the perception from appreciation. The monad emerges from its state of spiritual and intellectual unconscious, and skipping the first two planes too near the absolute to permit of any correlation with anything on the lower plane. It gets direct into the plane of mentality. But there is no plane in the whole universe with a wider margin or wider field of action in its almost endless gratifications of perception and appreciative qualities, that this plane, which has in its turn an appropriate smaller plane for every form, from the mineral monad up to the time when the monad blossoms forth by evolution into the divine monad. But all the time it is still one and the same monad, differing only in the incarnation throughout its ever succeeding cycles of partial or total obscuration of spirit, or the partial or total obscuration of matter, two polar antitheses, as it ascends into the realms of mental spirituality or descends into the depths of materiality. Morg speaks about the monad a lot in his Hyperianism. Very interesting to discover that there's some differences with what they're saying, what he says, but he's using ontological math to prove his points. But I go based on this because everything is overlay. And if you read Dolores Cannon, the same thing. We were once the rock, the mineral, the veggie, the fruit, the insect, the animal, and we've had many cycles until we became human. So there's something to this. There's weight to this because more than one people say and express it differently. To the return to esoteric Buddhism, it is there stated with regard to the enormous period intervening between the mineral epoch on Globe A and the man epoch that the full development of the mineral epoch on Globe A prepares the way for the vegetable to develop. And as soon as this begins, the mineral life impulse overflows into Globe B. Then, this is what I talk about with the overlaying. Then, when the vegetable development on Globe A is complete and the animal development begins, the vegetable life impulse overflows to Globe B, and the mineral impulse passes on to Globe C, then finally comes to the human life impulse on Globe A. And so it goes on for 3 rounds when it slackens and finally stops at the threshold of our globe at the 4th round, because the human period of the true physical man to be, the 7th, is now reached. This is evident for, as said, there are processes of evolution which precede the mineral kingdom, and thus a wave of evolution, indeed, several waves of evolution precede the mineral wave, and it is progress round the spheres. And now we have a quote from another article, The Mineral Monad in 5 Years of Theosophy. Quote, there are 7 kingdoms. The first group comprises 3 degrees of elementals, or nascent centers of forces from the first stage of differentiation from Mula Prakrti, or rather Pradhana, primordial homogeneous matter, to its 3rd degree, from full unconsciousness to semi-perception. The second or higher group embraces the kingdoms from vegetable to man, the mineral kingdom thus forming the central or turning point in the degrees of the monadic essence, considered as an evoluting energy. 3 stages, sub-physical on the elemental side, and the mineral kingdom, 3 stages on the objective physical. These are the first or preliminary 7 links of the evolutionary chain, end quote. Quote, primarily, end quote, because they are preparatory and though belonging in fact to the natural, they yet would be more correctly described as subnatural evolution. This process makes a halt in its stages at the threshold of the 4th stage, When it becomes on the plane of the natural evolution, the first really man-ward stage, thus forming with the three elemental kingdoms, the 10, the Scythrothial number, it is at this point that begins a descent of spirit into matter, equivalent to an ascent into physical evolution, a reascent from the deepest depths of materiality, the mineral, towards the status quo, with a corresponding dispensation of concrete organism up to nirvana, the vanishing point of differentiated matter. Therefore, it becomes evidently why that which is pertinently, sorry guys, can't get that word out, called in esoteric Buddhism, wave of evolution and mineral, vegetable, and animal and man impulse stops at the door of our globe. At its fourth cycle or round, it is at this point that the cosmic monad, Buddhi, will be wedded to and become the vehicle of the Atmic ray. Buddhi will awaken to its appreciation of the Atman and thus enter on the first step of a new sedentary ladder of evolution, which will lead it eventually to the 10th, counting from the lowest upwards, of the Scythrothial tree, the crown. Everything in the universe follows analogy, as above, so below. Man is the microcosm of the universe. That which takes place on the spiritual plane repeats itself on the cosmic plane. Concretion follows the lines of abstraction corresponding to the highest, most, and must be the lowest, the material to the spiritual, thus corresponding to the Scythrothial crown or upper triad. There are the three elemental kingdoms which precede the mineral and which, using the language of the Kabbalists, answer the cosmic differentiation to the worlds of form and matter, from the super spiritual to the archetypal. Now, what is a monad? And what relation does it bear to an atom? The following reply is based upon the explanation given in answer to these questions to the above cited article, The Mineral Monad, written by the author. None whatever is answered to the second question. To the atom or molecule as existing in the scientific conception at present, it can neither be compared with the microscopic organism, once classed among polygastric infusia, I don't think I'm saying that right, and new regarded as vegetable and classes among algae, nor is it quite the monas of the peripatics. I'm not saying that word either. Sorry, guys. Physically or constitutionally, the mineral monad differs, of course, from the human monad, which is neither physical nor can its constitution be rendered by chemical symbols and elements. In short, as the spiritual monad is one, universal, boundless, and in parte, which rays nevertheless form what we in our ignorance call the individual monads of men. So the mineral monad begin at the opposite point of the circle is also one, and from it proceed the countless physical atoms, which science is beginning to regard as individualized. Otherwise, how could one account for and explain mathematically the evolutionary and spiral progress of the fourth kingdoms? The monad is a combination of the last two principles in man, the sixth and seventh, and properly speaking, the term human monad applies only to the dual soul, Atma, Buddhi, not to its highest spiritual vivifying principle, Atma, alone. But once and since the spiritual soul, if divorced from the latter, Atma, could have no existence, no being, it has thus been called now the monadic, or rather cosmic essence, if such a term be permitted, in the mineral, vegetable, and animal, throughout the series of cycles from the lowest elemental up to the Deva kingdom, yet differs in the scale of progression. It would be very misleading to imagine a monad as separate entity, trailing its slow way in a distinct path through the lower kingdoms, and after an incalculable series of transformations, flowering into a human being. In short, the monad of a Humboldt dates back to the monad of an atom of Horniblade. Again, I don't think I'm saying these words right. Instead of saying a mineral monad, the more correct phraseology in physical science, which differentiates every atom, would of course have been to call it the monad manifesting in the form of Prakrti, called the mineral kingdom. The atom, as represented in the ordinary scientific hypothesis, is not a particle of something, animated by a psychic something, destined after aeons to blossom as a man, but it is a concrete manifestation of a universal energy, which itself is not yet become individualized, a sequential manifestation of the one universal monas. The ocean of matter does not divide into a potential and constitute drops until the sweep of the life impulse reaches the evolutionary stage of man birth. The tendency towards segregation into individual monads is gradual, and in the higher animals comes almost to the point. The Peripatetics applied the word monas to the whole cosmos in the pantheistic sense, and the occultists, while accepting this thought from convenience sake, distinguished the progressive stages of evolution of the concrete from the abstract by the terms of the mineral, vegetable, animal, monad, are examples. The term merely means that the tidal wave of spiritual evolution is passing through that arc of its circuit. The monadic essence begins to empirically differentiate towards individual consciousness in the vegetable kingdom, as the monads are uncompounded things, as correctly defined by Leibniz. It is the spiritual essence which vivifies them in their degrees or differentiation, which properly constitutes the monad, not the atomic aggregation, which is only the vehicle and substance through which thrill the lower and higher degrees of intelligence. Leibniz conceived of the monads as elementary and indestructible units endowed with the power of giving and receiving with respect to other units, and thus of determining all spiritual and physical phenomena. It is he who invented the term appreciation, which together with nerve sensation expresses the state of the monadic consciousness through all the kingdoms up to man. Thus, it may be wrong on strictly metaphysical lines to call Atma Buddhi a monad, since the materialistic view it is dual and therefore compound. But as matter is spirit, and vice versa, and since the universe and the deity which informs it are unthinkable apart from each other, so in the case of Atma Buddhi, the latter being the vehicle of the former, Buddhi stands in the same relation to Atma as Adam Kadmon, the Kabbalistic logos, does in Ein Sof or Multa Prakrti to Para Brahman. Very interesting. A few words more of the moon. What it may be asked are the lunar monads just spoken of. The description of the 7 classes of Pitris will come later, but now some general explanations may be given. It must be plain to everyone that they are monads, who, having ended their life cycle on the lunar chain, which is inferior to the terrestrial chain, have incarnated on this one, but there are some further details which may be added, though they border the closely or forbidden ground to be treated of fully. The last word of the mystery is divulged only to the adepts, but it may be stated that our satellite is only the gross body of an invisible principles. Seeing then that there are 7 earths, so there are 7 moons, the last one being visible, the same of the sun, whose visible body is called a Maya, a reflection, just as man's body is. The real sun and the real moon are invisible as the real man, says the occult maxim. And it may be remarked in passant that those ancients were not so foolish, after all, who first started the idea of the 7 moons. For though this conception is now taken solely as astronomical measure of time in a very materialized form, yet underlying the husk, there can be recognized the traces of profound philosophical idea. In reality, the moon is only the satellite of the earth in one respect, viz., that physically the moon revolves around the earth, but in every other aspect, it is the earth which is the satellite of the moon, and not vice versa. Startling as a statement may seem, it is not without confirmation from scientific knowledge. It is evidenced by the tides, by the cyclic changes in many forms of disease which coincide with the lunar phases, and can be traced in the growth of plants and very marked in the phenomena of human gestation and conception. The importance of the moon and its influences on Earth were recognized in every ancient religion, notably the Jewish, and have been remarked by so many observers of psychical and physical phenomena. But so far as science knows, the Earth's action on the moon is confined to the physical attraction, which causes her to circle in her orbit. And should an objector insist that this fact alone is sufficient evidence that the moon is truly the Earth's satellite on other planes of action, one may reply by asking whether a mother who walks around and around her child's cradle, keeping watch over the infant, is the subordinate of her child or dependent upon it. Though in one sense she is the satellite, yet she is certainly older and more fully developed than the child she watches. It is then the moon that plays the largest and most important part as well in the formation of the earth itself, as in the peopling thereof with human beings. The lunar monads, or Pitris, the ancestors of man, become in reality man himself. They are the monads who enter or cycle of evolution on globe A, and who, passing around the chain of planets, evolved the human form as has just been shown. At the beginning of human stage of 4th round on the globe, they ooze out their astral doubles from the ape-like forms which they have evolved in round 3. And it is the subtle, finer form which serves as the model round which nature builds physical man. These monads, or divine sparks, are thus the lunar ancestors, the Pitris themselves. For these lunar spirits have to become men in order that their monads may reach a higher plane of activity and self-consciousness, the plane of the Manasa Putras, those who endow the senseless shells created and formed by the Pitris with mind in the latter part of the 3rd root race. In the same way, the monads, or egos of men of the 7th round of our earth, after our own globes A, B, C, D, parting with their life energy, will have informed and thereby called to life other Laya centers destined to live and act on a still higher plane of being. In the same way, the Turin ancestors created those who will become their superiors. It is now It now becomes plain that there exists in nature a triple evolutionary scheme for the formation of the three periodical upadas, or rather three separate schemes of evolution, which is our system, are inextricably interwoven and interblended at every point. These are the monadic or spiritual, the intellectual, and physical evolutions. These three are the finite aspects or the reflections on the field of cosmic illusion of Atma, the seven, the one reality. The monadic is, as the name implies, concerned with the growth and development into still higher phases of activity of the monad in conjunction with the intellectual, represented by the Mansa Dhyans, the solar devas, or the Anguswata Praetries, the givers of the intelligence and consciousness to man, and the physical, represented by the Chihais of the lunar Pitris, round which nature has concreted the present physical body. This body serves as the vehicle for the growth, to use a misleading word, and the transformation through manas, and owning the accumulation of experiences of the finite into the finite, infinite, of the transient into the eternal and absolute. Each of these three systems has its own laws and its rule and guided by different sets of the highest dhyans or logi. Each is represented in the constitution of man, the microcosm of the great macrocosm, and it is the union of these three streams in him which makes him the complex being he is now. Nature, the physical evolutionary power, could never evolve intelligence unaided. She can only create senseless forms, as will be seen in the anthropogenesis. The lunar monads cannot progress, for they have not yet sufficient touch with the forms created by nature to allow their accumulating experiences through its means. It is the Mansa Dhyans who fill up the gap, and they represent the evolutionary power of intelligence and mind, the link between spirit and matter in this round. Also, it must be borne in mind that the monads which enter upon the evolutionary cycle upon Globe A in the first round are in very different stages of development. Hence, the matter becomes somewhat complicated. Let us recapitulate. The most developed monads, the lunar, reach the human germ stage in the first round, become terrestrial through very ethereal human beings towards the end of the third round, remaining on it, the globe, through the obscuration period as the seed for the future mankind in the fourth round, and thus become the pioneers of humanity at the beginning of this, the fourth round. Others reach the human stage only during later rounds, in the second, third, or first half of the fourth round. And finally, the most retarded of all, those still occupying animal forms after the middle turning point of the fourth round, will not become men at all during the Manavatra. They will reach the very urge of humanity only at the close of the seventh round, to be, in their turn, ushered into a new chain after Prailaya by older pioneers, the progenitors of humanity, or the seed humanity, the men who will be at the head of all the end of the rounds. The student hardly needs any further explanation on the part played by the fourth globe in the fourth round in the scheme of evolution. From the preceding diagrams, which are applicable to rounds, globes, and races, it will be seen that the fourth member of the series occupies a unique position. Unlike the others, the fourth has no sister globe on the same plane as itself, and thus forms the fulcrum of the balance, represented by the whole chain. It is the sphere of final evolutionary adjustments, the world of karmic scales, the whole of justice, where the balance is struck, which determines the future course of the monad during the remainder of its incarnation in the cycle. And therefore, it is that after the central turning point has been passed in the great cycle, after the middle point of the fourth race in the fourth round on our globe, no more monads can enter into human kingdom. The door is closed for the cycle and the balance struck. For were it otherwise, had there been a new soul created for each of the countless milliards of human beings that have passed away, and had there been no reincarnation, it would become difficult indeed to provide room for the disembodied spirits, nor could the origin and causing of suffering ever be accounted for. It is the ignorance of the occult tenets and the enforcement of false conceptions under the guise of religious education, which had created materialism and atheism as a protest against the asserted divine order of things. The only exceptions to the rule just stated are the dumb races, whose monads are already within the human stage in virtue of the fact that these animals are later than and ever half descended from man, their last decadents being the anthropod and other apes. These human presentments are in truth only the distorted copies of the early humanity, but this will receive full attention in the next book, as commentarily broadly renders. Oh boy, and there is crazy fonts. Quote, every form on earth and every speck atom in space strives in its efforts towards self-information to follow the mold and model placed for it in the heavenly man. It's the atoms, involation and evolution is external and internal growth and development have all one in the same object, man. Man as the highest physical and ultimate form on this earth, the monad in its absolute totality and awakened condition as a culmination of the divine incarnations on earth, end quote. Quote, Dhyans are those who have evolved their Bhuta doubles from themselves, which Rupa form has become the vehicle of monad's seventh and sixth principles that have completed their cycle of transmitigation in the three preceding Kapalas rounds. Then they, the astral doubles, became the men of the first race of the first race of the round, but they were not complete and were senseless. This will be explained in the books that follow. Meanwhile, man, or rather his monad, has exited on the earth from the very beginning of this round, but up to our own fifth race, the eternal shapes, which covered those divine astral doubles, changed and consolidated with every sub-race. The form and physical structure of the fauna changing at the same time, as they had to be adapted to the ever-changing conditions of life on the globe during the geological periods of its formative cycle. And thus shall they go on changing with every root race and every chief subrace down to the last one of the seventh in that round. Very interesting. Quote, the inner now concealed man was then, in the beginning, the external man, the progeny of the Dionys, Petries. He was the son like unto his father, like the lotus, whose external shape assumes gradually the form of the mold and model within itself, as did the form of man in the beginning evolve from within the without. After the cycle in which man began to procreate his species after the fashion of the present animal kingdom, it had become the reverse. The human fetus follows now in its transformations all the forms that the physical frame of man had assumed throughout the three Kapalas rounds during the tentative efforts at the plastic formation around the monad by senseless, because imperfect matter in her blind wanderings. In the present age, the physical embryo is a plant, a reptile, an animal, before it finally becomes man, evolving within himself his own ethereal counterpart in his turn. In the beginning, it was that counterpart, astral man, which being senseless got entangled into the meshes of matter, end quote. But this man belongs to the fourth round. As shown, the monad had passed through, journeyed, and been imprisoned in every transitional form throughout every kingdom of nature during the three preceding rounds. But the monad, which becomes human, is not the man in this round. With the exception of the highest mammals after man, the anthropods, destined to die out in this our race, when their monads will be liberated and passed into the astral human forms of the highest elementals of the sixth and the six races, and then into the lowest human forms in the fifth round. No units of either of the kingdoms are animated any longer by monads destined to become human in their next stage, but only by the lower elementals of their respective realms. The last human monad incarnated before the beginning of the fifth root race, the cycle of metempsychosis for the human monad is closed, for we are the fourth round and the fifth root race. The reader will have to bear in mind, at any rate, one who has made himself acquainted with esoteric Buddhism, that the stanzas which follow in the book and book 2 speak of the evolution of our fourth round only. The latter is a cycle of the turning point after which matter, having reached its lowest depths, begins to strive onward and to get spiritualized with every new race, with every fresh cycle. Therefore, the student must take care not to see the contradiction where there is none, as in esoteric Buddhism, rounds are spoken in general, while here only the fourth, or our present round, is meant. Then it was the work of formation. Now it is that of reformation and evolutionary perfection. Finally, to close this chapter, and various but unavoidable misconceptions, we must refer to a statement in esoteric Buddhism, which has produced a very fatal impression upon the minds of many theosophists. One unfortunate sentence from the work just referred to is constantly brought forth and forward to prove the materialism of the doctrine. Sorry, guys, there's a lot of things in between. The progress of organisms on the globe says that mineral kingdom will no more develop the vegetable than the earth was able to develop man from the ape till it received an impulse. Whether this sentence renders literally the thought of the author or is simply, as we believe it is, a lapis calami, may remain an open question. It is really with surprise that we have ascertained the fact that esoteric Buddhism was a little understood by some theosophists, as to have led them into the belief that it thoroughly supported Darwinism, evolution, and especially the theory of descent of man from a pithecoid ancestor. As one member writes, I suppose you realize the 3/4 of theosophists and even outsiders imagine that as far as the evolution of man is concerned, Darwinism and theosophy kiss one another. Nothing of the kind was ever realized, nor is there any great warrant for it. So far as we know in esoteric Buddhism, it has been repeatedly stated that the evolution as taught by Manu and Kapila was the groundwork of the modern teachings, but neither occultism nor theosophy has ever supported the wild theories of the present Darwinists, least of all the descent of man from the ape. Of this, more hereafter, but one has only to turn to page 47 of the Esoteric Buddhism 5th edition to find there the statement that man belongs to a kingdom distinctly separate from that of the animals. With such a plain and unequivocal statement before him, it is very strange that any careful student should have been so misled unless he is prepared to charge the author with the gross contradiction. Every round repeats on a higher scale the evolutionary work of the preceding round, with the exception of some higher anthropods, as just mentioned. The monad inflow or inner evolution is at the end till the next Manavatra. It can never be too often repeated that the full-blown human monads have to be first disposed of before the new crop of candidates appears on this globe at the beginning of the next cycle. Thus, there is a lull, and this is why during the fourth round, man appears on Earth earlier than any animal creation, as will be described. But it is still urged that the author of Esoteric Buddhism has preached Darwinism all along. Certain passages would undoubtedly seem to lend credence to this inference, besides which the occultists themselves are ready to concede partial correctness to the Darwin hypothesis in later details. By laws of evolution and after the midway point of the fourth race of that which has taken place, physical science can really know nothing, for such matters lie entirely outside of the sphere of investigation. But what the occultists have never admitted, nor will they ever admit, is that man as an ape in this or in any other round, or that he could be one, however much he may have been ape-like, this would vouch for the very authority from who the author of Esoteric Buddhism got his information. Thus, to those who confront the occultists with these lines from the above named volume, it is enough to show that we may reasonably, and that we must, if we would talk about these matters at all, conceive a life impulse giving birth to a mineral form, as of the same sort of impulse concerned to raise a race of apes into a race of rudimentary men. To those who bring the passage forward as showing decided Darwinism, the occultists answer by pointing to the explanation of the master, Mr. Sennett's teacher, which would contradict these lines, were there written in the spirit attributed to them. A copy of this letter was sent to the writer together with others 2 years ago, 1886, with additional marginal remarks to quote from the secret doctrine. It begins by considering the difficulty experienced by Western student in reconciling some facts previously given with the evolution of man from the animal, from the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms, and advises the student to hold to the doctrine of analogy and correspondences. Then it touches upon the mysteries of the devas and even gods, having to pass through states which it was agreed to refer to as immortalization, inhibation, inzonization, and finally incarnation, and explains thus by hitting at these necessities and failures given in the ethereal races Daihyan Kohans. Concerning it says, still at these failures are too far progressed and spiritualized to be thrown back forcibly by and from the Daihyan Kohanship into the vortex of a new primordial evolution through the lower kingdoms, after which only a hint given after the mystery contained in the allegory of the fallen Asuras, which will be expanded and explained in Book 2. When karma has reached them at the stage of human evolution, they will have to drink it to the last drop of the bitter cup of retribution. Then they become an active force and commingle with the elementals, the progressed entities of the pure animal kingdom, to develop little by little the full type of humanity. These Daihyan Kohans, as we see, do not pass through 3 kingdoms, as do the lower Pitris, nor did they incarnate in man until the 3rd root race. Thus, as the teaching stands, quote, man in the first round and first race on the globe D, our Earth, was an ethereal being, a lunar Daihyan, as man, non-intelligent, but super spiritual, and correspondingly on the law of analogy in the first race of the 4th round, in each of the subsequent races and subraces, he grows more and more into encased or incarnate being, but still preponderantly ethereal. He is sexless. Unlike the animal and vegetable, he develops monstrous bodies corresponding with his coarser surroundings. End quote. Second round, He-Man, still gigantic and ethereal, but growing firmer and more condensed in body and more physical man, yet still less intelligent than spiritual, for mind is a slower and more difficult evolution than it is physical frame. Third round, he has now a perfectly concrete and compacted body, at first the form of a gigantic ape, and now more intelligent, rather cunning, than spiritual. For on the downward arc, he has now reached a point where his primordial spirituality is ellipsed and overshadowed by the nascent mentality. It is the last half of the third round. His gigantic stature decreases and his body improves in texture, and he becomes a more rational being, though still more an ape than a diva. All this is almost exactly repeated on the third root race of the fourth round. The fourth round, intelligent. Sorry, guys, I can't see. Intellect has an enormous development in this round. The dumb races acquire our present human speech on this globe, on which from the earth, the fourth race language is perfected and knowledge increases. At this halfway point of the fourth round, as the fourth root or Atlantean race, humanity passes the axial point of the minor Manvarata cycle, the world teeming with results of intellectual activity with spiritual decrease. This is form an authentic letter which follows the later remarks and additional explanations traced by the same hand from the footnotes. There's crazy madness going outside, so I do apologize for that pause. The original letter contained general teachings, a bird's eye view, and particularized nothing. To speak of physical man, while limiting the statement to the early rounds, we'd be drifting back to the miraculous and instantaneous coats of skin, the first nature, the first body, the first mind, on the first plane of perception, on the first globe in the first round, is what was meant. For karma and evolution have centered in our make such great and strange extremes, from different natures marvelously mixed. Restore, he has now reached the point of, and by analogy in the third root race in the fourth round, where his, the angel man's, primordial spiritual is ellipsed and overshadowed by nascent human mentality, and have the true version on your thumbnail. These are the words of the teacher text, words and sentences in brackets and explanatory footnotes. It stands to reason that there must be enormous difference in such terms as objectivity and subjectivity, materiality and spirituality, when the same terms are applied to different planes of being and perception. All this must be taken into relative sense, and therefore there is little to be wondered at if left to his own speculations. An author, however eager to learn, yet quite inexperienced in these abstruse teachings, and has fallen into an error. Neither was the difference between the rounds and the races sufficiently defined in the letters received, nor was there anything of the kind required before, as ordinary Eastern disciple would have found out the difference in a moment. Moreover, to quote from a letter of the masters, the teachings were imparted under protest. They were, so to say, smuggled goods. And when I remained face to face with the only correspondent to the other, Mr. Blank, had so far tossed all the cards into confusion that little remained to be said without trespassing upon law. Theosophists, who it may concern, will understand what it meant. The outcome of all this is that nothing had ever been said in the letters to warrant the assurance that the occult doctrine has ever taught, or any adept believed in, the preposterous modern theory of the descent of man from a common ancestor with the ape, an anthropod of the animal kingdom, unless metaphorically. To this day, the world is more full of ape-like men than the woods are of men like apes. The ape is sacred in India because its origin is well known to the initiates, though concealed under the thick veil of allegory. Hanuman is the son of Pravana, Vayu, the god of the wind, by Anjana, a monster called Kasari. Though his genealogy varies, the reader who bears this in mind will find in Book 2, Passim, the whole explanation of the indigenous allegory. The men of the third race, who separated were gods by their spirituality and purity, though senseless and as yet destitute of mind as men. These men of the third race, the ancestors of the Atlanteans, were just such ape-like intellectually senseless giants as were those beings who during the third round represented humanity. Morally irresponsible, it was this third race, men, who through promiscuous connection with animal species lower than themselves created the missing link, which became ages later, in the tertiary period only, the remote ancestor of the real ape as we find it now in the Pithecoid family. Thus, the earlier teachings, however unsatisfactory, vague, and fragmentary, did not teach the evolution of man from the ape, nor does the author of esoteric Buddhism assert in anywhere in his work in so much words, but owning to his inclination towards modern science, he uses language which might perhaps justify such an inference. The man who preceded the fourth race, the Atlantean race, however much he may have looked physically like a gigantic ape, the counterfeit of men who have not the life of a man was still a thinking and already a speaking man. The Lemurio Atlantean was a highly civilized race, and if one accepts tradition, which is better history than the speculative fiction, which now passes under the name, he was higher than he and we are, with all sciences and the graded civilization of the day. At any rate, the Lemuro Atlantean of the closing third race was so. And now we may return to the stanzas. So I hope you guys enjoyed this section. It was rather long, but worth reading. And it honestly, when I talk about things overlaying and all the planes of existence overlaying, it's really explaining it differently, but very similar to what I have to say, and what I understand things to be. So I find this very informative and interesting, and I hope you did as well. Sending each and every one of you love and light, and I hope to see you on the next one, guys. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and have a great day. Bye, guys.